The sun was setting on a quiet street in the city, its fading light casting long shadows on the pavement. On any other evening, things might have stayed calm. But that night, a single moment, an act so small yet so powerful, would change everything. A simple note, tucked into a pocket, would lead to something no one could have predicted. It was the kind of moment that could only happen once in a lifetime. You may wonder, what could possibly happen when a young black girl slips a note into the pocket of a police officer? Is it a plea for help? A warning? Or something even deeper? As she walked past, the officer, a man who had seen it all in his years of service, felt the quick touch. He barely noticed, too busy with his own thoughts, the weight of the day hanging over him. But little did he know, that small gesture was the spark that would ignite a chain of events that neither of them could stop. Her eyes, focused yet uncertain, glanced up for a second, just long enough for him to catch her gaze before she quickly turned away. He had no idea who she was, nor why she had decided to approach him like that. And yet, as he walked away, the note in his pocket started to feel heavier. He didn't take it out right away. He just let it sit there, the curiosity gnawing at him. But soon enough, with a sigh, he pulled the note from his pocket, expecting nothing more than a scrap of paper with scribbled words. But when he read it, when he saw the two words written on that page, his heart stopped. He didn't know how to react. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he had just read. Who had written this? Why now? His years of experience had never prepared him for something like this. His pulse quickened, and for the first time in a long while, the man who had seen it all felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. What was written on that note? What could have possibly been so powerful, so life-altering, that it left him frozen in disbelief? And what happens next? Will he take action? Or will he ignore the message and let it slip into the darkness like so many things had before? The suspense in the air thickens, and you're left wondering, what happens when two worlds collide, when something as simple as a note carries the weight of a lifetime? Stick around as we dive deeper into this story, one that challenges everything you think you know about choices, consequences, and the unexpected power of a few words. Because what happens next will change everything for both of them. Stay tuned for the shocking twists that lie ahead. You won't believe what happens next. The officer, still holding the note, stood frozen in the dimming light of the evening. His fingers trembled slightly as he stared at the two words written in bold, hurried handwriting. For a brief moment, he questioned whether he had seen them correctly. His heartbeat, once steady, had turned erratic, and his mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. What did this mean? Was it a warning? A desperate cry for help? Or something darker? He glanced around, almost expecting someone to jump out at him, to give context to the cryptic message he now clutched in his hand. But there was nothing. No one was around. The street was empty, save for the streetlights casting their soft glow. He was alone. He folded the note carefully, slipped it back into his pocket, and began to walk toward his patrol car. Every step felt heavier, as though the weight of the note was pressing down on him. He had been a cop for years, seen his fair share of situations that could have gone south, and dealt with more complicated cases than most people could imagine. But this felt different. Something about the way the girl had approached him so quietly, yet so deliberately, told him that he was no longer just dealing with a simple moment in the day. He had been pulled into something far bigger than he could grasp. His mind wandered back to the girl. He didn't know her name, and she had disappeared into the crowd almost as quickly as she had appeared. What did she know? Why was she so calm, so composed when handing him the note? Her face had been almost unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a glint of something that made him uneasy. It wasn't fear, though. No, she wasn't scared. But there was something else there, something far more dangerous: determination. It wasn't long before he found himself back at the car, his hands still gripping the wheel a little too tightly. He needed to think. The last thing he needed was to rush into a decision. He'd been trained for moments like this, trained to stay calm, analyze, and then act. But how could he act when he had no idea what the note meant? The truth was, he had no idea what he was even supposed to do now. The two words swirled in his mind. One of the things he had learned in his line of work was that you didn't get involved in things you didn't understand. He had always kept his distance from anything that seemed too personal, too messy. It was safer that way. But now, with this note in his pocket, that same instinct to keep his distance had started to wane. Something told him he couldn't ignore this. Not this time. Meanwhile, the girl was walking away, her footsteps steady as she blended back into the crowd. She knew what she had done. She wasn't worried. The hardest part was over. She had taken the first step, the most important one, and now it was in the officer's hands. She had waited for this moment for so long, rehearsed every detail in her mind, and knew exactly what would happen next. It wasn't just about slipping a note into his pocket. It was about sending a message. It was about making sure he understood. Her heart still raced, but there was a feeling of relief too. The weight of the moment was lifting. She had chosen him for a reason. This wasn't random. The officer wasn't just any cop. He had a reputation. He was known for his integrity, his dedication to justice, and his ability to see through the noise. He was exactly the person she needed. She just had to make sure that when the time came, he would listen. The girl had seen so much in her life, things she wasn't supposed to see, things that no child should ever have to witness. The violence, the injustice, the way people had been treated as if their lives didn't matter. She had grown up in a neighborhood where things like that were all too common. But the more she saw, the more determined she became to change it. She couldn't just sit back and let the world keep spinning on the same broken axis. She had to do something, anything. And that's when she decided to take matters into her own hands. But she wasn't naive. She knew the risks, knew that her actions could lead to trouble. That's why she had planned it so carefully. Everything had to happen at the right time, in the right place. She couldn't afford to make a mistake, and so the officer had to be the one. He was the key. She had to make him understand. She had to make him see what was at stake. Back in his patrol car, the officer leaned forward, resting his elbows on the steering wheel. The street lights flickered outside, and the hum of the engine was the only sound breaking the silence. He pulled the note back out of his pocket, staring at the two words again. They were simple enough on their own, but their meaning felt so much more complicated. The two words were, "She's gone." Asterisk. For a moment, he wondered if he had read it wrong. Maybe it was just a simple note, an unfortunate coincidence. But the way it was written, the urgency, the way it had been tucked away so carefully, told him otherwise. The officer had known loss in his life. Everyone did, but this was different. He felt a pang in his chest, something gnawing at him as he read the words again. She's gone, gone. That simple word hit him harder than he expected. But who was gone? Was it the girl? Was it someone he knew? Was it someone she knew? His mind went into overdrive as he tried to piece together the connection between the girl and the note. He had been in this line of work long enough to know that nothing was ever as straightforward as it seemed. And this was far from straightforward. The girl hadn't just given him a note. She had given him a message. She had wanted him to know something important. But what? And why him? The questions piled up, and with each passing second, the mystery deepened. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been dragged into something much bigger than himself. This wasn't just about the girl or the note. This was about something far more serious. Something that had been brewing for a long time. And if he didn't figure it out soon, the consequences could be far worse than he ever imagined. With his heart still pounding in his chest, the officer started the engine and pulled away from the curb, not knowing where the road would lead, but feeling more certain than ever that he couldn't turn back now. The story was only just beginning, and it was one that would change everything. The officer's mind raced as he drove through the darkened streets. His eyes kept darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to follow him, to jump out from the shadows. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as his thoughts spiraled in all directions. The note, those two words, asterisk, she's gone asterisk, they kept echoing in his head. What did it mean? Was it a warning, a confession, or some kind of cry for help? And who was she? The more he thought about it, the less certain he became. The urgency in the girl's actions haunted him. It was like she knew something he didn't, something dangerous, something that could unravel everything. He had to find out. But how? He had no leads, no direction. As he turned the corner onto a quieter street, a small part of him wanted to turn back, to forget about the note, and pretend it had never happened. But the feeling in his gut told him that would be a mistake. The truth was, he couldn't walk away from this. Whatever was happening, whatever the girl knew, it was tied to something larger. He could feel it in his bones. Meanwhile, the girl was walking through the dark streets of her own neighborhood, a mind just as unsettled as the officer's. But she wasn't afraid. No, fear had long since left her. She had seen too much to be afraid anymore. But the weight of what she had just done, of what she had set in motion, was beginning to sink in. She had made her move. Now there was no going back. She had spent weeks, months even, planning this moment. Every detail, every step, every word had been calculated. She knew how dangerous it was. She knew how unpredictable people could be. But she also knew she couldn't just stand by any longer. The world had been turning a blind eye for too long, and it was time for things to change. Her thoughts wandered to the officer again. She didn't know him personally, but she knew enough. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't the kind of cop who turned a blind eye or acted with indifference. He had always tried to do the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. He had a reputation, one built on years of dedication and service. That's why she had chosen him. He was the only one who would understand what she was trying to say. But she couldn't help but wonder, was he ready? Was he willing to listen, or would he walk away, pretend it wasn't his problem? She had made the choice to trust him, but now, as the reality of the situation began to settle in, she wondered if she had done the right thing. Back in the officer's car, the silence felt suffocating. The city lights blurred past him as he drove aimlessly, his mind trying to piece together the puzzle. The girl had given him a clue, but it wasn't enough. He needed answers. He needed to understand who she was. He pulled over to the side of the road and took out his phone, typing a few quick words into the search bar. The name he had typed was one he hadn't thought about in years, but it was a name he couldn't ignore. A name that had been whispered about in certain circles, in certain places. He clicked on the first result, his pulse quickening as he read through the articles, the news reports, the rumors. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. The girl, the one who had handed him the note, was connected to something much bigger than he could have imagined. It wasn't just a random act of defiance or a cry for help. This was part of a larger movement, one that had been simmering for years, gaining momentum. People had been talking about it, but no one had been able to pin it down. It was messy, fragmented, full of contradictions, but it was real. And now the officer was in the middle of it. As he processed the information, the weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about the girl anymore. This was about a cause, a fight, a battle that had been brewing for far too long. And if he was going to make sense of it, if he was going to understand why the girl had chosen him, he would need to dig deeper, much deeper. But that would mean stepping into a world he wasn't sure he was ready for. It was a world where nothing was as it seemed, where allegiances were tested, and where trust could get you killed. The officer took a deep breath, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. He had to act fast. He couldn't let anyone know he was getting involved in this. Not yet, not until he understood more. But that feeling, that gnawing sense that he was already in too deep, wouldn't go away. Back on the streets, the girl had reached her destination. It was a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town, one that most people wouldn't give a second glance. But to her, it was a safe house, a place where she could regroup, plan her next steps. She stepped inside and immediately felt the tension lift from her shoulders. For a moment, she was able to breathe again, but that relief was fleeting. She couldn't stay here long. She was well aware of the risks. She knew that everything she had done, everything she was doing, could lead to danger. People were watching. There were eyes everywhere. The same people she had been fighting against were now onto her, and she had no illusions about what they would do if they caught her. The officer's investigation had already begun to stir things up. His search for answers would soon lead him into deeper waters. But the girl wasn't worried about that, at least not yet. She had played her part. Now it was up to him to take the next step, and when he did, when he uncovered the truth, she would be ready. She had to be. As the officer sat in his car, his mind still racing, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The note, the girl, the cause, this was no longer just a random incident. This was the beginning of something much larger. And whether he was ready or not, he had been pulled into it. There was no turning back. He glanced at the clock. Time was running out. The longer he waited, the more the danger would grow. But one thing was clear. He couldn't let this go. Not now. Not when the stakes were so high. He had a responsibility, and he wasn't going to back down. He would find out who was behind this, and when he did, he would make sure they couldn't hide any longer. The story had only just begun, and the tension was building with every passing moment. What would happen next? Only time would tell. The officer's mind was consumed with the puzzle. The more he dug into the mystery, the deeper it pulled him. Every piece of information he uncovered only seemed to add more layers to the question. Who was behind this? What was the girl's involvement? And most importantly, what did she mean by asterisk, she's gone asterisk? Every lead he followed only led him to more questions, but no answers. It was like chasing shadows, and every step forward only made the darkness seem more suffocating. The night was growing colder, the city lights casting an eerie glow over the streets as he drove further into the unknown. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a text message from an unknown number. He hesitated, his gut telling him to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of him. He picked it up. The message was short. Asterisk, you're getting too close, asterisk. His heart skipped a beat. The warning was clear, and it sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew what he was doing, and that someone was watching him. He stared at the message, the words echoing in his mind. Asterisk too close, asterisk. The girl had set something in motion, and now he was entangled in it, whether he liked it or not. The question was, how far was he willing to go? His phone buzzed again, this time with an alert from his precinct. Another case of violence in the same neighborhood the girl had come from. The coincidence was too stark to ignore. He didn't need to see the details to know that there was something connected here. Everything was pointing in the same direction. There was a network, something deep beneath the surface, and the girl, she was involved in it, whether she knew it or not. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel, frustration boiling inside him. He wasn't getting the full picture. The clock was ticking, and every second that passed, the more he felt like he was losing control. He needed to find her. He needed to understand what she knew and why she had come to him. But finding her was proving harder than he anticipated. It wasn't just about the girl anymore. It was about the web of people she was tied to, the ones who would do anything to protect their secrets. Meanwhile, the girl was nowhere near the safety she had hoped for. The room she was in, small, dimly lit, felt colder with each passing minute. She had to keep moving, stay one step ahead. Her mind raced, the weight of what she had started hanging over her. She had taken risks, no doubt about it, but every moment now felt like the calm before a storm. The officer had the note. He had the first clue, but there was so much more. She knew the dangers that were coming. She knew they wouldn't just let her walk away from this, and the officer, despite his good intentions, was now in over his head. If he pushed any further, if he kept following the trail, he would learn things that would change everything. Things that could destroy everything they both knew. She couldn't let that happen. She couldn't let him get caught up in it. But what was the alternative? She had already done what she needed to do. She couldn't pull back now. even if it meant putting herself and him in even greater danger. The officer's role in this was crucial. It wasn't about just finding her anymore. It was about understanding what was truly happening. And for that to happen, she needed him to keep going, even if he didn't know what he was walking into. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside the door snapped her back to reality. The soft creak of the floorboards told her that someone was approaching. She held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew exactly who it was. They had found her. The question wasn't asterisk if asterisk they would find her. It was asterisk when asterisk. Her hand reached for the small bag tucked beneath the table, fingers brushing the cool metal of a weapon she had never thought she would need. She wasn't afraid to use it, but she didn't want to. She wasn't a killer. She wasn't a fighter. She was just someone trying to make a difference. But the world didn't give her many options. The footsteps stopped outside her door. She could hear the soft sound of breathing. She had to make a decision: fight or run. There was no time to think, no time to plan. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. The officer was getting closer to the truth, but every step he took pulled him deeper into danger. He had started this search with good intentions, believing he was doing the right thing. But now, with every clue he uncovered, the more he realized how dangerous this situation really was. The people he was getting involved with, the things he was about to uncover, they were more powerful, more ruthless than he could ever have imagined. The text message had been a warning, yes, but it was also a sign that he was on the right track. And right now, that was the only thing that kept him going. He couldn't turn back. He couldn't stop now, not when he was so close. He had followed the trail for hours, and it was starting to lead him to the heart of the storm. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. But who could he trust? The system he had spent his life working for was starting to crumble around him. His faith in the justice he had sworn to uphold was being tested in ways he never thought possible. Just as the tension reached its peak, he received another text. The sender was unknown, but the message was chilling. Asterisk, she's not the only one at risk, asterisk. The words hit him hard. There was more at stake than just the girl. Whoever was behind this, whatever they were hiding, had their sights set on far more than a single life. The officer felt his pulse race. He knew he had to act quickly, but everything inside him told him that whatever was about to happen, it would change the course of everything. And no matter how much he prepared, he couldn't anticipate the magnitude of the storm he was walking into. Both the girl and the officer were closing in on a dangerous truth, but neither of them fully understood the depths of the trap they were stepping into. The clock was ticking, and with every second, the stakes grew higher. What would happen when everything came to a head? Would the girl escape? Would the officer uncover the truth? Or would the forces working against them crush them both before they could find the answers? The story was heading toward an unavoidable climax, but no one could predict who would come out of it alive. The officer's mind raced, the text still fresh in his mind. Asterisk, she's not the only one at risk, asterisk, what did it mean? Who else was in danger? He had been so focused on the girl, on solving the mystery she had thrown at him, that he hadn't stopped to consider the bigger picture. There was more to this than he realized. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was a web of danger stretching far wider than he could see. He took a sharp turn, speeding down the quiet streets, his thoughts spinning. The girl had triggered something deep, something that had set off a chain reaction. But who was pulling the strings? Who was threatening not just her, but others too? He knew he was in over his head, but every part of him told him he couldn't back out now. Whatever was about to happen, whatever truths were hiding in the darkness, he needed to uncover them. As his car skidded to a stop in front of a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call. He hesitated for a moment, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He didn't recognize the number, but something about it felt important, urgent. He answered the call. "Officer, we need to talk." The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. It wasn't a voice he recognized. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, a a sense of foreboding creeping into his chest. "Who is this?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're closer to the truth than you realize," the voice said, cutting through the silence. "But you're also closer to the danger. It's already too late. You've already been marked." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Market, he had been warned before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a vague threat, it was real. The stakes had just been raised, and they were higher than he could have imagined. "Who are you?" he pressed again, desperate for answers. But the voice was already gone. The call had ended, leaving him alone with his racing thoughts. He stared at the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking in. He had been warned, and someone somewhere was watching his every move. He couldn't let this go. But who could he trust? As he stood there in the dark, the feeling of being surrounded, of being trapped, grew stronger. His mind replayed the girl's note. She's gone, who was she? And how was she tied to everything that was happening now? Was she the key to it all, or was she just another pawn in a much larger game? He had to know. He couldn't leave without answers. Meanwhile, the girl had her own problems. She had barely stepped out of the safe house when she felt the weight of eyes on her, following her every move. She had known it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. The whole world seemed to be closing in on her, and every step she took felt like it might be her last. She had trusted the officer to do what was right, but now she wasn't sure if he would be able to handle the truth. It was too dangerous, and the people they were up against were ruthless. Just as she was about to slip into an alley to hide, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was an unknown number, but she answered it anyway. A calm, cold voice greeted her. "You've made a mistake," a voice said. "You can't stop what's already in motion. It's already too late." Her heart dropped. She recognized the voice instantly. It was someone she'd been running from for years. Someone who had always been a step ahead. Someone who would stop at nothing to make sure the truth stayed buried. They had found her. Panic surged through her, but she knew she couldn't show it. She needed to stay calm. She needed to think. If they were tracking her, then the officer was in even more danger than she realized. But the real question was, how had they found her? She had covered her tracks carefully, leaving no trace, no hint of where she was headed. Yet, somehow, they had found her. The phone call ended abruptly, and for a long moment, the only sound was the beating of her own heart in her ears. She had to act fast. Her next move had to be perfect. She couldn't let them corner her. She couldn't let them catch her. Not now, not after everything she had done to get this far. And the officer, what was he thinking right now? She had hoped he would figure it out, that he would connect the dots, that he would uncover the truth. But everything was moving too fast, and the danger was closing in on both of them. She had to get to him, to warn him. But how? She reached into her pocket, pulling out a piece of paper she had written the 2 words on. She's gone, The note had been a gamble, a desperate plea for help, a signal to the officer that something bigger was at play. But she had no idea just how big it was. The darkness around her seemed to close in tighter, the silence more suffocating with every second. She could feel the tension building, the inevitable crash approaching. Her pulse quickened as she realized just how far they had both fallen into this deadly game. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and now there was no way out. Just as she was about to move, a car pulled up in front of her, its headlights blinding her for a moment. The door opened slowly, and she froze, her heart in her throat. This was it. She had no choice but to face whatever was coming for her. From the officer's side, everything was unraveling too. He was too close to the heart of the mystery, too close to the answers he desperately needed. But as the minutes ticked by, the danger surrounding him grew exponentially. The message had been clear. The game was rigged. Whoever was behind this had anticipated every move he'd made. Now, it was only a matter of time before everything exploded. The tension in the air was thick. Both the girl and the officer were walking straight into the unknown, unsure of who or what they would face next. But one thing was certain: whatever happened next would change everything. The stakes had never been higher. The moment the car door opened, she felt it, an overwhelming sense of inevitability. The chill in the air seemed to freeze everything around her, the sound of her heart pounding in her chest louder than ever. Her mind raced, but her body stood still, almost as if it had given up on running. The man who stepped out of the car wasn't a stranger. She recognized him immediately. It was the officer. His face was tight with tension, his eyes scanning the alley, looking for someone. When his gaze landed on her, he didn't hesitate. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. For a moment, she didn't know whether to feel relieved or more terrified. This wasn't the way it was supposed to go. She had planned on meeting him, sure, but not like this, not under these circumstances. She quickly glanced around, making sure no one else was nearby. "I can't talk here," she whispered urgently. "They're watching." The officer's face hardened. "I know. I'm not here to hurt you, but we're running out of time." Her breath caught in her throat. He was finally getting it. He was understanding the gravity of everything, but it was too late to go back. The warning signs were already clear. Whoever was after her, and now him, wasn't just some faceless threat. They were everywhere, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. "What's happening?" the officer asked, his voice desperate for answers. "Everything you've uncovered. It's bigger than you think," she said, taking a cautious step toward him. "It's not just me they're after. It's everything. Everyone who knows the truth. Whoever is behind this has more power than you can imagine. They can make people disappear. They've done it before, and they'll do it again." The officer's eyes narrowed. He didn't know whether to believe her, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. Everything he had discovered, the warnings he'd received, the people he'd encountered, it all pointed to one thing. There was a conspiracy, a network, so vast that it seemed impossible. But now that he was in the thick of it, there was no way out. "Then why did you come to me?" he asked, voice shaking slightly. "Why send me that note?" She hesitated. This was the moment where everything would come crashing down. The truth was dark, but it had to come out. "Because you're the only one who can help," she said, her eyes locking with his. "You've already uncovered some of it. You're too far in now to back out. You're not just a bystander, officer. You're part of this now, whether you want to be or not." His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of her words sinking in. He thought he was just doing his job, but now everything had shifted. He wasn't just a cop anymore. He was a part of a much bigger, more dangerous game. Before he could say anything else, the sound of tires screeching interrupted their conversation. A black SUV skidded to a halt in front of them, and the door swung open. Without thinking, the officer grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her back into the shadows of the alley. But they were too late. The men in black suits who had stepped out of the SUV were already circling them. "They found us," she whispered, her voice filled with terror. The officer drew his gun, his hand trembling. He didn't know how many they were or what they wanted, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. One of the men stepped forward, his face calm and cold. "You've made a mistake," he said, his tone eerily calm. "We gave you a chance to walk away." The officer didn't flinch, his grip tightening on his weapon. "I'm not walking away." Without warning, the men lunged and the officer fired. The shot rang out in the night air, the sound deafening in the narrow alley. But just as quickly as it had started, the gunfire stopped. The men didn't flinch, didn't fall. They were like shadows, too fast, too precise. They closed in on the officer and the girl, their movements almost too fluid to be human. The officer's mind raced. This wasn't a fight he could win. Not here, not now. They were too well prepared, too well coordinated. And as much as he hated to admit it, the girl was right. He had walked too far into their world to turn back now. There was no way out. And then, just when it seemed like they were about to be overpowered, something unexpected happened. The SUV's headlights flickered, and then everything went dark. The men froze, their attention now diverted. The officer's heart skipped a beat. Something was happening, but he couldn't see it, couldn't understand what was going on. Then, a voice cut through the silence, one that the officer recognized immediately. "Get away from them." The voice belonged to a woman, calm and commanding. The men in black looked up in shock, unsure of what to do. But before they could react, the woman appeared from the shadows, her presence so commanding that it stopped them in their tracks. "Who are you?" one of the men demanded, his voice filled with confusion and anger. The woman didn't answer right away. She simply stepped forward, her eyes narrowing on the officer and the girl. And then, in a flash, she moved. It was too fast for the officer to follow, but in the next moment, the men were on the ground, unconscious. The officer stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The girl, however, wasn't surprised. She looked at the woman with a mixture of awe and recognition. "You knew her?" the officer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl nodded slowly. "She's part of it too. She's the one who can help us." The woman turned to them both, her expression unreadable. "You've made it this far," she said, her voice carrying an unspoken promise. "But there's still much you don't know. You're both too deep now to turn back. But I can help you. I can show you the rest of the puzzle. But you need to trust me." The officer's mind was spinning. He had thought he understood the stakes. He thought he knew what was coming. But this was something else entirely. The girl had been right all along. There was more to this than just her. There were forces at play that neither of them could fully comprehend. The final twist hit him hard. The woman wasn't just another player in the game. She was the mastermind behind it all. And just like that, everything had changed again. The woman's gaze held them both, steady and calculating. The officer could still feel his heart racing from the chaos, but now, all of it seemed to slow down, almost as if he was watching from the outside. His mind was trying to process everything, what had just happened, who this woman was, and what exactly he had just stepped into. He glanced at the girl beside him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and certainty. She wasn't surprised, not by his woman's arrival, not by the way the men had fallen without a fight. She had known all along that there was more to this story than what he could see. The officer felt a weight settle in his chest as he looked at the woman. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with disbelief. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small device. With a few quick movements, she pressed a button, and a small holographic display flickered to life between them. It was a map, but not one he recognized. It wasn't just of the city, but of multiple locations, encrypted pathways, hidden safe houses, secret operations. His breath caught in his throat. It was a map of everything, the network they were all caught in, and it was far more extensive than he could have ever imagined. She looked at him, the corner of her mouth curling slightly in a knowing smile. "This is the bigger picture," she said softly. "The truth you've been chasing, the one that's been pulling you in. It's part of something much larger. You're not just dealing with a few corrupt individuals. You're up against a system." The girl spoke up, her voice steady now, as though she had already come to terms with everything that had happened. "The people who run everything. They don't want the truth to come out. They control everything, from the government to the media to the police force. Anyone who threatens that system is silenced." The officer's head was spinning. He had spent years in law enforcement, upholding justice, but now it felt like his entire world had been turned upside down. The very system he had sworn to protect was the one he was now fighting against. "So, you're saying," the officer struggled to find the right words, "you're part of this system?" The woman's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a flicker of something, regret, maybe. "No, I'm not part of it. I'm trying to destroy it." The officer's confusion deepened, but it was the girl who answered, her voice steady and resolute. "She's part of the underground resistance. They've been fighting this system for years. They're the ones who've been trying to expose the truth, but every time they do, it gets buried." The woman's eyes flicked to the girl, her expression softening for just a moment. The truth is dangerous, but it's also powerful. People like you, people who can see beyond the lies, they're the key to bringing it down. The officer took a step forward, his mind still grappling with the enormity of the situation. And what do you want from me? What do you want from her? The woman's eyes locked onto his. I need you to help me finish this. You've already seen too much. There's no going back for either of you. A heavy silence fell over them. The officer could feel the weight of her words. This wasn't just some conspiracy he had stumbled upon. It was a war between truth and control. And he had a choice to make. The temptation to walk away was strong, to ignore it all, pretend none of this had happened. But he knew he couldn't. Not after everything. The girl looked at him, her eyes searching his face. We can take them down, she said, her voice full of hope. Together, we can expose everything. We can bring this system to its knees. He glanced at the map. The blueprints of power, corruption, and control spread out before him. It was all connected. Every corrupt leader, every manipulated system, it was all there, waiting to be exposed. But exposing it would come with a price. His life, her life, anyone who tried to uncover the truth, they would all be targets. I'm in, the officer said finally, his voice steady. But you're right. We can't do this alone. The woman nodded, a small glimmer of respect in her eyes. I knew you would say that. And just like that, they were a team formed not by choice, but by necessity. The officer, the girl, and the woman, bound by a common goal, to bring down the system that had controlled everything for so long. The odds were stacked against them, and they knew the dangers of what they were about to face. But for the first time in what felt like forever, the officer felt like he was on the right side of history. The days that followed were a blur of planning, covert meetings, and strategy sessions. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the conspiracy. They learned to trust each other, to rely on each other's strengths. The officer, with his knowledge of the law and the system, became their guide. The girl, with her experience in the underworld, became their eyes and ears. And the woman, the mastermind, coordinated everything, staying steps ahead of the opposition. As they worked in the shadows, the system began to unravel. Evidence was leaked, documents were exposed, and hidden truths came to light. The truth was powerful, but it was also dangerous. The deeper they dug, the more they realized just how far-reaching the corruption went. Every layer they uncovered revealed more lies, more manipulation, until it seemed like there was no end to it. But with every step forward, they grew more determined. The fear they had once felt began to fade, replaced by the knowledge that they were doing something that mattered. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone who had been silenced, for everyone who had been lied to, for everyone who had been controlled. In the final moments, as they prepared to release the last of the information to the public, they knew they were about to change the world. The system that had controlled everything was about to fall. The people in power would have no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. But even as they waited, the officer felt a flicker of doubt. The truth was out there now. The world would know, but at what cost? As the story came to a close, the audience was left to ponder the true cost of uncovering the truth. Was it worth it? What would the world look like once the lies were exposed? The officer, the girl, and the woman had sacrificed everything, but their actions would live on, a reminder that no matter how powerful the system, the truth always finds a way to break free.